There are no perfect people, not one, here on earth, save the risen Savior who gave his life for all of us. I'll stop and let you flog that. Yes, ma'am. I'll let you go. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll open this up with this as well before I start my own personal story and why I think this is such an important time to be an American who understands and appreciates life on both sides of the proverbial track. Why it's so important to be an American who has seen the good and the bad, the ugly and the amazing, the beautiful. It is simply this, that if we are going to achieve another American century, it will require us, those who agree and those who disagree, to have a civil public forum to debate the serious issues of our time, and then to agree to disagree without being disagreeable. That seems kind of hard in America these days. It's like we're having a food fight, that actually scoring points only means you're fighting. I think that's wrong. I think scoring points means we're winning, not just fighting. Fighting is good, winning is better. And if we are going to win as one American family, we are going to have to figure out how to assume that we are a single unit charged with the responsibility of making sure that future generations of Americans experience the good that we did and as little of the bad as we did. But that'll take work. And as a kid who grew up in a single-parent household, mired in poverty, with my mother sitting right here on the front row, thank God for my mama. God bless her. The one thing I can tell you is that Frances Scott believed in hard work. She believed that there was dignity in all work. And you all have heard her story before, 16-hour days as a nurse's aide, changing bedpans, rolling patients. But part of the story I haven't told as often is that when my grandmother was alive and walked a mile and a half or two to work to clean houses as a maid and come home and then clean our house when we were living together, my mother had an example of hard work. She would go with my grandmother at times and clean houses as a maid to help put food on the table. There was a garden that she would go in the backyard and pick, and I remember sitting on the front porch kind of sort of snapping peas in the heat, wondering, do I really want to eat this bad? I was not quite sure that those vegetables were worth the price of eating, which was work. But there's dignity in all work. It's one of the reasons why I can say it with a smile on my face. If you are able-bodied, you work. That's an American value. There's a big difference between can and cannot. If you can, you should. If you can, you must. If you cannot, let's have a conversation. But the American ethos that I reflect upon most often is found in the examples in my life of people who went the extra mile so that I would understand the importance, not of sitting back, but of going the extra mile. The other thing I'd say is, as a kid growing up in that impoverished neighborhood that was very consistently without resources except for one, love. I believe love is the most powerful force on earth. My mother and the gospel taught me that love is not simply an emotion. Love is a commitment to do what you ought to do when you ought to do it because you can do it. And make no excuses for not getting it done. And you've heard my story of my grandfather, who was a fantastic man who was born in the Jim Crow South, 1921, a very different South Carolina, where a black man had to get off the step of the sidewalk and not make eye contact. To think about the evolution from his life story to when my mother was born, which I'll never tell you when she was born. No need to get spanked in public. I can avoid all that. The progress that was made in those years, but then to understand that even though progress had been made, to find yourself where it is still separate and unequal, where there are water fountains for people who look like me and those who don't, that there are restaurants and hotels where she's old enough and young enough to remember the pain and the misery and the bitterness of a different world. And then fast forward to when I was born. To think of all the progress from my grandfather's generation to my mother's generation to my generation, where I went to school with everybody. What a blessing of progress. And then to fast forward to my nephew's generation. If you've been around me for any time, you know my nephew is the heir to the Scott throne. It's a little throne. But he gets it all. From both sides, my brother and I, he gets it all. But here's where I take exception with some of the negativity that comes my way. Now, it's a guy that looks like me. I'm going to get a lot of heat for being a conservative. Anybody say amen to that? You realize that's true, right? So some people who have TV opportunities to speak about me in love, I'm sure it's love when they talk about me. Especially on The View. I'm sure it's love. I'm sure it's love. I'm sure it's love. But certainly some of the comments that I hear are offensive, even disgusting. But here's where it becomes dangerous. And please hear my heart on this one. It becomes dangerous when we tell young kids today that the only way to make it is if you're an exception. That the rule in America is you can't make it if you look like me. If that's the message we're selling young people, let us not be surprised or stunned and shocked when violence is high and educational performance is low. When we tell kids that there's no way to escape poverty unless you do something illegal or in entertainment, you're selling a lie to very impressionable young kids. That's dangerous. I don't find it offensive for my sake that they say things. I'm used to it. I don't find it disgusting for my sake when they say things. It happens that when I wrote the tax code that lowered the taxes for a single mother by 73%, and they called me a prop, I'm used to it. When I write legislation to refund the police, and they call me a token, I'm used to it. When I push back on the Biden administration's agenda, because I think inflation is too high and wages are too low, when I prefer a hand up than a hand out, because I believe that any child in any community can learn if they have good education. When I did all those things, they called me the N-word. I'm used to it. But when you tell young kids who go to this church and churches throughout the community, the only way forward is for you to win the lottery, for you to be the exception and not the rule, that's a price too high. Leads me to my fifth generation, my nephew. You see, if I was an exception, then it would just be about me. The fact that my brother, who is the ugly side of the family, ended up being the highest non-commissioned officer rank in the United States Army after 32 years to Command Sergeant Major Benjamin Scott. Maybe he's just the exception. My dad had a son too who didn't grow up with us, who grew up in Colorado. You think that brother's ugly? This guy, whew. He didn't even grow up here. 26 years later in the United States Air Force, he retired as a colonel. Went to the Air Force Academy. Maybe he's an exception. My nephew, raised in a single-parent household. I had the good fortune of helping to raise him in part. He graduated from a charter school that focused on STEM in the poor side of Augusta, Georgia, a poor community. But he ended up going to Georgia Tech and getting his biomedical engineering degree, 5 years and 4 years. He went to Duke to get his master's in engineering and management. Went to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers and got bored. I just took the money, but he got bored. And went back to medical school at Emory and finished medical school. And now he's in Boston, finishing his residency. You see, here's the truth of America. We have endured really hard times, but we come out just a cut above. And then we go through more hard times because we are the one nation on earth that fights with itself to get things right. We come up a little bit more. And then through pain and misery, through progress and struggle, we come up a little further. And we find ourselves as a nation experiencing immense prosperity and opportunity because we have climbed a miserable journey on the backs of patriots, black and white, to be in a position in Dr. Easley's church with a very diverse audience to talk about progress in America the day before we remember the fact that 1.3 million Americans paid the ultimate price so that we could sit here in peace, love each other. In the most remarkable country on God's green earth, if we don't stop for just a second and thank God Almighty that we find ourselves in the most remarkable place, because Americans are remarkable. 1.3 million paid the ultimate price so that the story of my family would go from cotton to Congress in a single life. So the story of your family can go from obstacles unbearable to opportunities unbelievable, pain so immense and piercing to a purpose that no one can deny. You see, whether your story is like my story or completely opposite of my story, the one thing it has in common is that we always rise above. The only question is how long will it take? But the question is never, will we make it? Let us not let the next generation face the same evil and hatred that we faced. They deserve more from us. So let's be one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Wow. Got a lot of questions.
Yes, sir.
And are you ready?
I'm ready.
Well,
if I don't like the question, Can I just skip it?
No,
Okay. Just want to make sure.
No.
I want to make sure I understand the rules of the road.
no. But what I wanted to really ask you was, of course, one here is, why are you running for president?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Why are you running?
Yeah, I'm running for president because I honestly believe that America can do for anyone what she's done for me. And if we restore hope and create opportunities and protect the America I just talked about, we will always be the city on the hill. We will always be the beacon in the midst of the storm. I can't sit idly by while what I'm watching happen to our nation is happening. I have got to get in the fight because fighting is important. But with me and God's help, winning will be our ultimate objective, and we'll achieve it.
That's good. Well, now you've been traveling.
I have.
And you have been going from state to state, sharing about faith and its connection to faith in America.
Yes.
What have you learned through this process of going from state to state? I know you was in Iowa, different places. What have you learned from that visit, going this tour that you're on?
That's a great question, Doc. One of the most important lessons I've learned is that when you get away from all news outlets, Americans get along pretty good. I'm serious. The one thing I must concede, whether you're in Iowa or New Hampshire, South Carolina or Texas, Florida, a couple weeks ago in Georgia, the one thing I can tell you is that most Americans in most places will go the extra mile, give you the shirt off their back, but sometimes we're being polluted by the cycles of news that have figured out that there's a way to monetize conflict and sell it. Very dangerous for our country.
Wow. Now, in your opening, you did share about inflation and all the effect of what's going on with the family in this country. What would you do as president of the United States to kind of alter that, change that, or help that? Or what would you, I mean, how do you look at that? We hear some of your, some of the things you like to see done.
Absolutely.
Show us the...
If I was president of the United States, I'm going to stand up.
That's fine.
My mom wanted a preacher anyway, so I'm going to pretend like she got a preacher today. I said, God said, rise up.
Come on.
Okay. That's for you, Mama. That's just for you. That's for you. Okay. So here's one of the things that, thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it. I'm going to just talk to you for the rest of the time we got here, okay? I'm going to talk to you, okay? So here's one of the things I'd say is that in order for us, if I was president of the United States, the first thing I would do to calm inflation is I would turn the spigot off. We can't spend money we don't have. Buying things we don't need. Trying to impress the world that ain't impressed. There's a difference. There's two ways to grow your economy. One is artificially that leads to an implosion. The other one is to trust the American people to give them their money back. So what's happened over the last couple of years is we've seen 16% inflation. 16% inflation is translated into, on average, the average family has lost about $450 a month in buying power. The average family in the country makes somewhere around $63,000 a year. Average 40%, 45% of Americans make $17.50 an hour. $35,000 a year. 1.5 incomes per household. So when we start talking about printing and spending $4 trillion that leads to 16% inflation, we're talking about with more money, you have less spending power. That's hard to do. When I had a chance to rewrite the tax code when we were in the majority, I cut taxes from 39.6% to the highest tax rate being 37%. And what happened in the economy, we took the corporate tax from 35 to 21, we cut the small business tax by 20%. And what happened in the economy was taxes went down. Average family got about $4,400 back in their pockets. Single mom like the one that raised me, making about $40,000 a year, had a 73% cut in her tax burden to the federal government. Dual income households had a 60% cut in taxes, and we have more money come to the federal government even with lower taxes. Why? because the actual economy, the private sector economy, started creating more jobs where the lowest 20% of the people in the workforce started making more money faster than the top 20%. The bottom 20% grew almost at 5% in income growth. The top grew at about 3%, bottom to 5%. So when you can create an economy where the lowest paid people have their income going up faster than the highest paying people, that creates real growth in your economy, so much so that the Treasury gets more money with lower taxes, but the family gets $4,400 additional dollars per person, per household. So that's the first thing I'd do. Second thing I would do is I'd focus my attention on a new industrial revolution. We are too dependent on foreign adversaries for what we need in America. I would bring home our factories and our jobs and create them here at home. I created something called opportunity zones that created incentives in the tax code so the private sector would spend their money in hard-hit financial areas. As a result of that, we have over $200 billion in total flowing into the hardest hit communities in America in just 6 years. Imagine if that's just one bill. Imagine what we could do with a Tim Scott's Made in America agenda, where we reshore our jobs, bring home our minerals and our microchips. We start making them here at home. And our medicine, make it here at home. 87% of what we need in our generic medicines comes from a different country. We can make that at home. Six-figure jobs, restoring all of our country to a level of prosperity because we believe in the American people, not the federal government.
Well, that leads me to another question.
Yes, sir.
Because we talk about bringing those jobs back and trying to do those things, but we know that China right now and the difficulty that's there. As President of the United States, what are you going to deal with some of those trades and things that's going on with China today, especially some of the things that you mentioned?
Absolutely. The first thing we have to do is recognize that China is not our friend. They're not our ally. They don't want our best interest. We are in the midst of an economic Cold War with China. They held a sign in our face and said, we're going to steal your intellectual property. We're going to replicate your military, and we're going to build it cheaper with your interest payments to the money y'all are borrowing from us. I say, not on my watch. Not on my watch. Not on my watch. We have to deal with China as an economic adversary and prepare our military. The stronger our military, the less likely there is a fight. The weaker our military, the more likely there is a fight. It's the Reagan Doctrine 2.0. Peace through strength would say, Victoria's how she would say it, but peace through strength. We have to be the strongest, most powerful force on earth for good. But if you are our ally, we are loyal. If you are our adversary, we are lethal. And make no bones about it.
Well, I have one more. This one's more about, it says, I am trying to start a small business. How could the success of the opportunity zones help me?
Yeah, so opportunity zones, there are about 9,000 of them across the country, 8,700 designated zones. The governors of each state designed where those zones would be. So what you ultimately have are these pockets where economic prosperity has been hit the hardest. Opportunity zones does not use any federal dollars. It only uses private sector dollars from the federal legislation to encourage people to reinvest. Because we're reinvesting in infrastructure. Downtown, the tech corridor on Morrison Drive is an opportunity zone. The Morrison Yard buildings on the left-hand side, if y'all from Charleston, anybody been here longer than 2-3 years? Yes. Okay, good, all right. So I failed world geography, and I'm not good at any geography. So just when you're going downtown, it's on the left-hand side, when you're on East Bay Street, all those new developments, Morrison Yard, those over 1 million square feet, That's an opportunity zone. It didn't gentrify anybody. No one was ran out of the community. It just built new things in the midst of the community. When that happens, small business owners are given lots of chances to provide security and maintenance and landscaping and general contractors and tech services. So the truth is, long term, you're starting to see opportunities for small businesses. And that's one of the ways that we make sure that small businesses are producing better with opportunity zones. And then local government and state government can add more incentives. One of the incentives that they are going to use in the future is called TIF districts, the tax increment financing of local projects that brings more money into an area, and then that money that comes into the area gets to reinvest that money to produce better results for the people in those areas.
Well, the other question that comes up, great answer. Republicans aren't known for caring. I'm reading them.
So Dexter just said, I may not agree with all that I'm getting ready to say. That's what it sounded like the pastor was trying to say.
No. Republicans aren't known for caring about the minority. How are you different? How are you different?
That's a good question. I think it's a fair question. So if I understand you right, you said that Republicans are not known for
caring for minorities. How are you different?
Well, I'm different because I got a beautiful bald head. Is one of the ways I'm different. Is that what you meant? That's not what he meant. Okay. So here's what I would say as a guy who's been 57 years in the same body. I understand the pain of discrimination, and I understand the joy of communities coming together. I understand the power of a single mama who prays for you, and I understand the amazing blessing of a mentor who ran the local Chick-fil-A in the Northwoods Mall who happened to be a white guy. The one thing I will say is that my life has been completely populated with good people who have helped me out, who didn't look like me, and good people like Al Jenkins, who's in the house today, one of my latest mentors, who's an African-American guy, Small Business Owner of the Year, taught me how to be a small business owner on his back. So one of the things I think that we have to overcome as the Great Opportunity Party is the perception that we don't care about minorities. Because I'm in church, I'm going to say it this way. That's a lie from the pit of hell. Now, let me put some meat on the bones. When we were in the majority, and I talked about the Tax Cuts and Job Act, the bill that I wrote, the domestic side of the tax bill, single mothers, their taxes went down. Also, employment went up. I said that part too. When I said employment went up, it didn't go up for just a single group of people. Unemployment went down to the lowest level at that time ever recorded for African Americans, 5.4%, the lowest ever at that point. It's lower now. For Hispanics, it went under 5%. For Asians, it went under 3%. For women, it was a 70-year low. For the majority population, it was a 50-year low. Here's my point. I can serve people who look like me at the exact same time I serve people who don't look like me. There's a way to make sure that with more flour, more eggs, and more milk, I create a bigger pie so that everyone who wants to achieve more can, more times than not, achieve more in the economy that grows versus the one that shrinks, number one. Number two, we have historically black colleges and universities because there was a time when people who looked like me could not go to schools throughout South Carolina, throughout the South. And so we constructed, I was not alive, but there was constructed HBCUs. Under our time in the majority, we brought funding for HBCUs to the highest level in the history of the country. And then we did what no other administration had ever done. We made the funding permanent so that HBCUs and their presidents and chancellors didn't have to come back every year asking for more. That had never been done by any other group until we did it. We also, there's something called Opportunity Scholarships in Washington, D.C. Consistently and disproportionately, African-American kids looking for those scholarships with a waiting list of at that time, 25,000 students. We added more resources to those funds to make sure that those scholarships continue to work. I've also started and co-chaired the School Choice Caucus, because I believe that the closest thing to magic in America is a good education. And where education is the hardest hit in our nation are in minority communities. So advocating on behalf of education options, whether that's a good public school, a good charter school, a good private school, a good virtual school, a good home school, I don't even care. I want good education for every single child in America. And that specifically helps minorities more than any of the population. For 200 attempts to pass an anti-lynching bill failed 200 times for more than 100 years in this nation. I helped get it done because it was the right thing. Farmers who have heirs property, consistently and disproportionately African Americans, particularly in the South. I worked and added amendments to the Farm Bill to make sure that those farmers would be able to use the farm number to have access to more of the farm programs. Because if you're in a competitive environment and you're on heirs property and you don't have title to it, you cannot use your land for leverage. Let's make it easier to use that property, that's family property, to produce more for the country, produce more for your family, and become more independent. I could go on and on. Sickle cell anemia, my office led the charge to make sure that there was more research for sickle cell anemia. We could just go on and on. From the military working with HBCUs to the private sector working for HBCUs to more money in Pell Grants. But what I've done a poor job of doing is talking about it. Because I embrace this notion that if you don't care who gets the credit, you get more accomplished. And so it has been a great strategy. Unfortunately, it has left some people wondering if we care at all. During the midst of the COVID, I put $10 million in the COVID funding for the Minority Business Development Center so that they could advertise the COVID resources because too many minority businesses weren't connected to the technology that helps them understand what's available. We don't talk about it because my theory is you just do what needs to be done for people and put your focus on people who don't have the ability to hire lobbyists. So I show up where people don't invite me because I want to go to places where they can't afford to come to Washington, D.C. I'm going to go to you. I'm working on a town hall in a Brazilian church. Not because I speak Portuguese. I failed Spanish. But because I want to be the guy who runs for the highest office of our land, not by talking to just people who I think look like the kind of people who will vote for a Republican. I want to fight for every single vote in America because I love all Americans. I want to serve all Americans. So we're going to take our show on the road. We're going to do it in every community, whether you vote for Republicans or not. People say, you're wasting your time by going those places. Well, if America's going to be a better nation, don't wait till you win. Do it when you run. Show people who you are. I'll close with this, Dexter. This is the longest answer in American history.
Yes.
It is. He said, yes. I only hire the most qualified, competent candidates I can find. I'm not hiring anybody by the way you look or who you're with or who your family is. I'm hiring the best and the brightest I could find. What we have done differently is we created intern programs with HBCUs with Hispanic organizations so I could bring in more students from across the country so they could see what it feels like to be in a conservative office. As a result of that, I have the most diverse office in the U.S. Senate. I have the only African-American female chief of staff in the history of the Senate, Republican or Democrat. I have the first Hispanic female chief of staff right now on the Republican side. The young lady who runs my banking, she's half Korean, comes from Hamdida. That's all I know is Korean. Thank you. Actually, I know Chimeyo too. You're welcome. Half Korean and half Puerto Rican. And I have lots of white folks and other black folks on all throughout my organizations. But I also have kids with special needs. Because diversity in America is not just the color of your skin, the amount of melanin in your skin. Sometimes diversity in America is your experience. It is hard to understand what a kid with special needs is going through. So we hire kids with special needs. Well, the guy who's with me now has been with me for 8 years. I learn more by talking to Patrick about his life and his goals and his ambitions so that I can understand other people. I had a guy who had a car accident and is paralyzed from the waist down. His ability to get dressed in the morning takes 45 minutes to get dressed in the morning to make it to work. Rain, wintertime. I think sometimes we think we know what it feels like to be whatever. Try that for a lifetime. I wish we were a little more sensitive to the issue of diversity than just the color of our skins. I can feel the rapid fire coming.
Yep, that's what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen. Time is rolling.
Yes, sir. I'm
okay.
sorry.
All right. What does police reform look like to you?
Yes.
You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, the long story short on police reform, what it looks like to me is better training, better resources, and the best wearing the badge. Here's what I'm suggesting, that demoralizing and demonizing and defunding the police is a mistake colossal. Respecting and appreciating and building healthy relationships with police is a necessary component for community policing to actually flourish. And when we do that, we have fewer incidents and more officers go home to their families at the end of their shift, and more members of the community goes home to their families at the end of the interaction. Myself and Trey Gowdy did a statewide, and I believe you participated in it as well. We brought African-American leaders and police officers, typically black leaders, typically white officers, together around the state so we could have a discussion about there's no such thing as an ordinary police stop. And teaching your kid 10 and 2 a year before they start driving is also an issue too. So we wanted to make sure that everybody understood each other's experience. Go on a ride along and walk in the shoes of someone like Dexter. And we found something remarkable happened. We invited no press. People actually had good questions for each other. And they walked away with more respect and admiration for each other. There was empathy, not just sympathy, but empathy in the room. God bless you. When we do that, the communities get closer. And so it's not back to blue or do you care about black folks? That's a false binary. If you care about one, you must care about the other, or someone pays too high of a price.
All right. As the president of the United States, what will be your first executive order?
Ooh. Just one?
Well, it says, I think that may be as orders.
I would say one of the colossal mistakes of the current president was canceling the XL Keystone Pipeline. If you want cleaner energy and a cleaner environment, best you drill in the United States of America. If you want to have the safest transportation for oil and gas, pipelines are the answer to reducing your carbon footprint. Said differently, the XL Keystone Pipeline is the safest, most environmentally friendly way of making a difference in our energy sector. To continue to expound upon that issue, just know energy security is national security. You cannot have a safe America if we are depending on oligarchs or bullies or dictators to set the price of our energy, especially when we have plenty of it in our own soil. We should not be begging anyone in the Middle East for what we can produce at home.
Well, we're going into that question about energy. Well, how do you feel about nuclear energy, and how does that fit in America?
Yeah. So the cleanest form of the all of the above strategy is nuclear energy. We ought to have a whole conversation about nuclear energy as a country. And I will say this, for those of us living in this Tri-County area, particularly in Berkeley County, we have a nuke school right down the road there. And we put little towns together on these things called submarines, 7,000 people. They go all around places. And their energy is provided by nuclear. Do a research when you get out of here, not in the middle of this. I know some of y'all are getting ready to take a nap. I can look at your faces. I'm almost done, y'all, I'm almost done. Just do research on how many people have lost their lives because of nuclear anything in the last 50 years. It'll shock you on how safe the energy alternative really is.
All right. How do you feel about teachers' pay?
It should go up. So, you can tell when he's shocked. He's like, that's all you got? Yeah. So here's what I would say, a couple things. Number one, I'm a big believer in federalism, which means I don't think every decision has to come from Washington. I believe most good decisions don't come from Washington. Therefore, mostly teacher compensation is a local or a state issue, not a federal issue. I will say, however, the size of our current Department of Education, where the average person makes around $100,000 plus a year and the average teacher makes about $50,000 a year, we could just cut some of that money out and send it back to the teachers.
Well, I know that this one's coming through as well. The southern border is a crisis right now in many ways.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your position and what you would do as president of the United States.
Yeah, the first thing I would say is build a wall. Don't talk about it, build a wall. I say that because of this reason. Not just because the important number of 6.3 million illegal immigrants coming across our southern border is a crisis. And it is. Not just because there are 100 plus people on America's national security watch list have been caught at our southern border. Not just because more than 7,000 people have flown from China to Mexico to cross our southern border? Not just because we found in the last month or 6 weeks a few from Iran crossing our southern border. Not just because 150 countries are represented in trying to get through our southern border. Also because 70,000 Americans have lost their lives to fentanyl coming across our southern border. Here's the shocker, though. Our nation spends I'm sorry, that's not true. Our nation brings in $5 trillion. Under this president, we spend $7 trillion. 40% more money than we bring in, we will spend. But we can't find $5 billion and $7 trillion of spending to use the available technology for surveillance of our southern border to stop fentanyl from coming across it. You can detect over 90% of the fentanyl for around $5 billion on our southern border. You could, instead of, now this is a very diverse audience. Some of you will not agree with my next statement, but that's fine. I understand. You come here for diversity and you get people who just totally disagree with you. I understand that. So I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand to a negative question. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand to the positive part of the question. For those of us here today who would not want the IRS to hire 87,000 new agents to spy on your accounts, please raise your hands. Good. Now that's what you call bringing people together. 95% of every race in the audience said, me too. Okay, good. I would take about $40 billion of that inflation, jokingly said, Reduction Act, and put it on our southern borders and hire more Border Patrol agents and pay them more money and give them more bonuses so that we could secure our southern border. That's what I would do as President of the United States. And then I would target the Mexican cartels, and they would cease to exist on my watch. One way or the other. There are two ways we can do it. There's an easy way and there's a hard way. But for 70,000 American lives, we're either going to have the cooperation we need or we're going to have the cooperation we need. I think we'll get it.
We talked a lot about America. We talked about the things that you want to do here in America.
Yes, sir.
But we hadn't heard anything about your foreign policy.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Beyond China, which we talked a little bit about China,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that the one thing I would say to all Americans is that sometimes it appears that we think that we get to determine when conflicts flare up. I'm of the opinion that we don't determine those conflicts around the world. I don't think America should ever be the world's police. I'm not going to send my brothers who served to die in foreign lands to be the world's police. We must first understand America's national vital interest. And once we understand America's national vital interest, we should execute that strategy consistently. And wherever there are American people, there will be a presence that says, this is a high price to pay for taking an American life. And so my foreign policy is a simple one when it comes to the aggregate value that we bring to the table. We must have the most powerful force for good on earth. If we cannot fight 3 conflicts at the same time, we are unprepared. If anyone thinks that the Middle East is growing more and more calm and peace-filled, please just smile at me because I want to know what happened. If anyone thinks the Indo-Pacific, anyone thinks that China is becoming less aggressive and not more aggressive, please let me see where you are. If anyone thinks that Putin plans without degrading and decimating his military to stop with Ukraine. I do not. If anyone thinks that having China and Iran in our back door of Latin America, cutting deals and hanging around, if anyone thinks we can control those 4 areas of the globe, including our back door, without a stronger, more powerful military that today is underfunded with backlogs on weaponry that we can't deliver to Ukraine or Taiwan because we don't have the firepower in our manufacturing sector to build those things any faster. We need an era of exponential innovation so that we create things here at home that includes an industrial revolution so that the next time there's a conflict, we are the ones producing our own weapons at the fastest clip humanly possible. That's got to be our goal, our objective. Anything less than that leaves the home front more vulnerable than it has to be.
Well, we only have time for one more question.
Yes, sir.
And I need you to answer this question in 2 minutes.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Well, it says here, America, of course, you've quoted this before, America is not a racist country.
Yeah.
You said that. Why do you think that, and why have you, I guess, promoted or said it?
Yeah, I get in a lot of trouble for saying that. I don't really know why I get in so much trouble for saying that. But I believe it because I've lived it. Think about this, okay? Anyone here live in South Carolina? Okay. Only about 70% of y'all. So this is good. 30% drove all the way here for this. Thank y'all very much for taking that journey. I told a story about my grandfather. I told a story of my mother. I told a story of myself. I told a story of my nephew. But think about this for a second. I ran for Congress in 2010. Looking like this, by the way. I weighed about 10, 15 pounds more, by the way, John. I weighed a little bit more than I weigh now. I lost a lot, taking your advice. And I ran against the son of Strom Thurmond. Anyone here heard of Strom Thurmond? I know no one knows who he was. He was a senator back in the day. Very powerful senator back in the day. Anyone heard of a guy named Governor Carroll Campbell? Those were my 2 opponents in Charleston, South Carolina, where the Civil War started. So there's a Civil War in Charleston, spread across the country. And then I'm born I'm not that old. I was born several decades later. And I run against the son of Strom Thurmond and the namesake of Carroll Campbell Jr., one of the most popular governors in the history of the state. I run against his son, Carroll Campbell III. And I win, 68-32. Now, I would like for y'all to think it was because of me. And that might be a small part of the equation. But here's the bigger part of the equation. Something happened in the hearts of people in our state and around our country. The evolution of the Southern heart is not celebrated nearly enough. Where people framed in the ugliest light for the longest time decided to judge a candidate on the content of their character and not the color of their skin. But not just that, but against the behemoths of Southern history. To suggest that I can conclude we live in a racist country when in the heart of the Civil War, against the heart of the Southern political structure, I don't just eke out a victory, but I win 68-32. 2-1, with 90% of the people voting in the primary being white. You can't convince me of anything else. Add on top of that, I don't know how you get there. Dexter's like 2 minutes and it's been 4. I heard him back there. I heard him. But this is such an important question to end on, and an important question that we're going to have to fight through for a long time to come. The forces today want me to believe that I don't know what it feels like to be black. The forces today want you to believe that the guy who failed 4 subjects as a freshman, Spanish and English, ain't nobody calling me bilingual, is somehow the exception. That the guy who grew up in a single-parent household in poverty in North Charleston, South Carolina, is somehow the exception. Here's what I can tell you. Yesterday's exception is today's rule. And we're all here celebrating the fact that in America, the content of your character is how we measure you most of the time. And I'm not going to pretend like, and I said this when I first made that statement in 2021 in response to President Biden's presidential address. I said, I have been the victim of discrimination. But America is not a racist country, because the aggregate value of my life and of everybody else I've talked to, we're moving in the right direction. And we're going to keep moving in the right direction. But this culture of grievance that feels like quicksand is siphoning off too much energy. And we need to get back to the culture of greatness. The question of, is this the land of opportunity, is answered, we are. We are not the land of oppression. And yes, I do believe that victimhood is a drug that destroys the life of the person who has it, because I've felt that before. Call it what you will. My life disproves the lies of those who believe that progress in America is a lie and faith in America is a fraud. God bless you.
Whoa, wow.
Hey, brother. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you too, well. Amen. Amen. Great night. Great night. Amen. Well, since you are standing, I do appreciate you guys being here tonight. Did you enjoy tonight? Yeah. Was it very informative? I do apologize, not able to get to everybody's questions. Some of your questions were so dynamic, I wanted to get to it, but he took a little longer than I thought. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. Would y'all do it? Would y'all come? We'll do it again. And so what I want to do real quickly, I know that we're going to just spend a few moments, if that's okay with Joe. We're going to spend a few moments. I know that Senator Scott wants to shake and greet some of you if possible and those things. But this is what the town hall is all about. That's why we have it here at our church, is to inform people and be aware of what's going on and answer those questions that you may have. And so we have accomplished that tonight. I just want to personally thank you so much, Tim Scott, for being with us as well. And I guess we're done.
We're done. All right. I'm going to shake some hands.
Okay. We're going to shake some hands. There's some free coffee up front. You got some refreshments.